All right, now I have the special privilege of being joined by ESPN's NFL draft contributor, Matt Miller. And Matt, as a trusted NFL draft expert like yourself for over a decade, I think Vikings fans are just a little excited, a little more than excited, put it that way, about your latest mock draft. You got the Vikings selecting Kwity Paye, defensive end from the University of Michigan, with the 14th overall selection. Personally, I'm a huge fan of this selection, but I need you to give us a little context of why you have the Vikings selecting him.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me on. I think the important note here is that the offensive tackles are off the board. You have to start there. Penei Sewell from Oregon is gone. Rashawn Slater from Northwestern is off the board, and it's close. It feels like those two are dropping as we get closer to the draft. But having the top offensive tackles off the board, the Vikings are in a position to get the best pass rusher in this class, which I think is important given the Yannick Ngakoue experiment didn't really work out. I think there's been some questions about Danielle Hunter's future with the team. Hopefully that does get solved. But regardless of his future, there is a need opposite him for a pass rusher. And I think Mike Zimmer, we know how much he loves his defensive players, how much he gets energized off that. Kwity Paye is, I think, the most explosive pass rusher in this class. It's tough because you can't just look at his production at Michigan and fall in love and say, like, oh, look, he had 15 and a half sacks like you can with a Gregory Rousseau. Instead, it's more about the traits, the ability to play. I mean, he played everything from 0-nose to 6 technique. So he lined up all over that Michigan defense. At 270 pounds, he has elite quickness, elite strength. So we're looking at someone who we're projecting will get better in the NFL once he's more in a natural position, playing as a defensive end. But the athleticism is really, really exciting for a draft prospect.
I would agree with you on that, but I you make me bring up a point. You keep saying that the offensive tackles are starting to slide down as the days go on. At what point do the Vikings trade up? And is it a priority for defensive end or offensive tackle?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that what the Vikings have to look at is the teams drafting right ahead of them, because you have the LA Chargers who could take an offensive tackle. You have the Philadelphia Eagles, who could take an offensive tackle. You can never rule out the New York Giants, Dave Gettleman, taking an offensive tackle. So I think the key is if you want to draft one, you would have to get up maybe to 10 overall. And Dallas is a team that could also entertain drafting a tackle because of injuries to Tyron Smith and Lyle Collins. So yes, they should probably think about it. If Penei Sewell's on the board at 8, and the Panthers, who just solved their quarterback problem with Sam Darnold, if they would entertain a trade back, I definitely think that's interesting. And that is the type of prospect where you would feel comfortable giving up a future first-round pick, which is what it would take to go from 14 to 8 or to 7. Well, the Lions aren't going to trade. So to 8, I think that is something that you would be willing to say, okay, Penei Sewell is one of the best offensive tackle prospects to come out in a long time. If it means you're not going to have a first-round pick in 2022, I think you'd probably be okay with that to land someone of his caliber.
So I feel like just from everything that you said, is left tackle everybody knows left tackle is a priority for the Vikings. Yeah. But Kwity Paye is the best player available. You take him. But with that said, with Kwity Paye being at 14, do you say the Vikings would trade up into a second-round spot to try to get a left tackle? Because there's still some guys out there. The guy from Clemson, Notre Dame, plenty of other guys, right?
Yeah, there absolutely is. This is a really deep offensive tackle class. And so I think that's one interesting way to look at this is at 14, you get the best pass rusher in the class in Kwity Paye. And then when you come back around to round 2, maybe you do have to trade up a little bit, but it's such a deep tackle class that you're getting a starting caliber player in the second round, whether it's, like you said, Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame, Dylan Radins from North Dakota State, Samuel Cosme from Texas, Jalen Mayfield, if you want to go back-to-back Michigan players. There is really good depth at the offensive tackle position this year to where you can still feel comfortable moving back and picking up a high-caliber player. And should be noted, the Vikings have had a lot of success in round 2 with the offensive line. I mean, Brian O'Neill, Ezra Cleveland looks like he's going to be a good player. So that is an area where they've been able to find some players. So it does make some sense that round 1, you go get your splashy pass rusher. Round 2, you just wait and see which tackles fall and feel like you can still get a good one.
So the Vikings have 2 third-round picks, 4 fourth-round picks, and me being a nerd when it comes to stuff like this, I like looking at, all 7 rounds. And one consistency that I have seen is that a lot of these experts have the Vikings selecting a quarterback in the 4th round, whether that be Kyle Trask or Kellen Mond. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you always want to look ahead, right? Even if it's just to draft and develop so that you can then trade that player. I think the names you mentioned, Kyle Trask from Florida, he's going to be off the board before the 4th round, I would expect. Kellen Mond from Texas A&M, similar situation. Davis Mills from Stanford. Those are 3 names that you actually hear a lot of teams like maybe in the 2nd round with the New Orleans Saints, Pittsburgh Steelers, Chicago Bears, Washington football team. There's a lot of teams that need that quarterback of the future. So those players could be rising up the board a little bit. I think in round 4, you're probably looking closer to someone like Jamie Newman who played last at Wake Forest, actually transferred to Georgia and then opted out. Sam Ehlinger at Texas, who's a little bit more of like a Taysom Hill type quarterback, not so much a natural passer. So you're starting to look at guys who have some deficiencies in their traits that you're hoping you can develop out. And with Jamie Newman, I mean, he's an exceptional athlete. We saw both he and Ehlinger at the Senior Bowl. Ian Book from Notre Dame would be someone a little bit later if you truly wanted to develop someone behind Kirk Cousins and you're not looking at necessarily a future starter, but just someone who's a good developmental quarterback. He would be someone I would look at later on day 3.
Who are some other positions of priority that the Vikings should look to address?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now you have to look at the corner position as one, just given some uncertainty at that spot. Even after bringing up Patrick Peterson, you probably want to start to think about, just churning the talent at the cornerback position. And this is something the Vikings have done a lot of over the years. They've drafted a lot of corners. So I would say, again, you've got those 2 third-round picks. You can look at the corner position. And I think a third wide receiver. They hit huge on Justin Jefferson last year. So whoever made that pick, let them do it again this year in the 3rd round. And you could find someone, I was just mentioning Cade Johnson from South Dakota State to some folks. So I think he'd be a great fit with the Vikings because he's an electric kick returner. He's a very good slot wide receiver. So I think going back to that well a little bit of let's continue to build out this wide receiver room, give some more weapons for Kirk Cousins in there.
You talked about Kirk Cousins, right? And Kirk Cousins maybe adding some depth with another quarterback in the draft. But I mean, we do have a guy named Harrison Smith on the back end. I mean, just a phenomenal perennial all-pro safety. But we know that is another need for depth. I was looking at some of your tweets last night. Illinois State Christian Uphall, you were really high on him.
Yeah, I am, and it's a small school player, but I think it's unfortunate because his pro day timing was not great. They had to do their pro day in like 30-degree temperatures, which affected him. But he is a really exciting player. And one of the things I love about safeties, and if you're a Harrison Smith fan, you'll appreciate this. I love safeties who still hit, like who will still come downhill and rock your world a little bit if you come over the middle, and he will absolutely do that. This is a good safety class. It really is. Whether it's uphill or Jamar Johnson from Indiana, who, if you pull up the YouTube clips of Indiana against Ohio State, he gave Justin Fields work all day long in arguably the worst day of Justin Fields' 2 years at Ohio State. So there are good mid-round safeties. Caden Stearns at Texas is another one who has a great athletic profile. Unfortunately, he was injured over the last 2 years for the Longhorns, but it's a good year, maybe with one of those 3rd-round picks to where you can start looking ahead at the safety position. So it is, I think some years it lines up. Your needs and value line up in the draft. It's definitely that way for the Vikings this year.
Yeah, and I think with that said, we got to talk about the fact that Xavier Woods definitely adds value to the safety room. But speaking of, these Vikings free agency moves, who would you say is a, underrated signing that the Vikings made this offseason that Vikings fans should be excited about?
Yeah, I'm still a big Dalvin Tomlinson guy, and I think that signing is flowing under the radar. I loved him coming out of Alabama. Thought he was very good with the New York Giants. Just they had a logjam at the position basically because Dave Gettleman loves defensive tackle. So I'm excited to see what he can do in Minnesota, where we've seen players have a lot of success in that role before. Obviously, when you have a great pass rusher on the edge with Danielle Hunter, it makes the job of a nose tackle or a one technique a little more valuable. And Tomlinson is exceptional there. And I think also you look at a division where running the football still matters. You have Aaron Jones staying in division. We have players like DeAndre Swift who are really emerging. David Montgomery as well in Chicago. So you have to be able to stop the run. And also, you kind of got a division with some shorter quarterbacks. So I love that interior pressure from a player like Tomlinson. So didn't really get the national notice, it's a splash signing, but Pat Pete is obviously a Hall of Famer. He's a great corner. But if I had to pick just one player that you're like, that's the move that could put this defense over the top, I really do think Tomlinson's that tone setter.
I'll get you out of here with this. How many more pieces are the Vikings away from making a splash late into the offseason?
Maybe 2. I think figuring out the left tackle position is huge, right? You got to figure that out. And then I would say a playmaker on defense, not necessarily a pass rusher or a corner or a safety, but a playmaker on defense, someone who the offense has to plan around, someone who can flip the field, whether that's with sacks or with interceptions. So I think those are the keys. And then obviously staying healthy, keeping Dalvin Cook healthy is a huge part of this. Getting Kirk Cousins more familiarity with Justin Jefferson, who somehow did all that without a preseason last year. It's amazing. So those two continuing to gel and build that chemistry, I think that's what it's going to take.
Awesome. Well, it is crazy to say that we are less than 3 weeks away from the NFL draft, but I'm excited. I know you are excited. I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.